Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bagdoian, thank you for your help on this and your work with us on the PSI subcommittee looking into the same thing. My friend, the ranking member, talked about how HHS has been responsive. You've indicated they have not been responsive in providing information. Since you mentioned that I've gotten 30,000 pages of documents, I would tell you only 2,000 of those pages are responsive to anything we asked about, and we're still getting delay. And all we're asking for right now is just a schedule to submit documents. If we have time, I'd like to hear your response to that, but I know from talking to your folks that you've had the same frustration. With regard to this issue, there is clearly a policy problem here, not just the fact that 11 of 12 of these fictitious people got through and were automatically re-upped, and then when some were kicked out of the system, 5 were brought back in after a phone call to HHS when they should not have been. So clearly we've got a problem here. But I think the statistical example of 12 might not be as significant as what you found out in terms of policy. So let me ask you a couple questions about that. Your statement mentions that GAO failed an initial identity proofing step in the application process. In other words, your people were fictitious, so they couldn't get through the online application process.
That's right.
But the GAO was able to proceed past this step after calling HHS. Can you describe what GAO did to verify the identity for these applications and why that's significant?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to obtain coverage by essentially following the system's own instructions. We failed the initial online test. We contacted the contractor who does the identity proofing. They couldn't clear it. And then they instructed us to call the marketplace, which we did. And then based on self-attestation of information, we obtained coverage.
So it was a phone call after getting denied twice, and through self-attestation, people got back in. So, I mean, this is a policy issue. This is not, again, just a statistical quirk that somehow your people snuck in. This is an HHS policy.
Yeah, we would view that, Senator, as at least an indicator of a control gap. I know it's a technical, nerdy kind of thing to say.
Yeah, clearly a control gap, and self-attestation is a policy that they have by a phone call. Even though you get rejected, you can get in just by a self-attestation.
That's correct.
With no proof. As another example, you noted in all 11 cases, GAO was asked to submit documents to show eligibility for subsidies. In some cases, GAO submitted only some of the required documents, but was nonetheless able to continue to receive coverage and subsidies. That was because of the so-called good faith exemption. Could you describe that rule? Again, it's a policy, and why it enabled GAO to receive coverage and subsidies even when it submitted only some of the required documents, and the legal basis that HHS used in implementing it.
Right. In terms of the legal basis, Senator Portman, we are awaiting a response from CMS, and our attorneys have been in touch with their attorneys. They've had some discussions, so we're trying to get some clarity on that. So under the good faith exemption or provision, whatever the term of art is, essentially the applicant is compliant with their obligation to submit documents as long as they submit one out of the however many that they've been asked to submit.
So again, your results as to these applications said this is not a result of a statistical quirk that you found. It is a result of HHS policy being implemented as planned. And I think anybody who cares about the Affordable Care Act should be concerned about this policy because it allows people to continue receiving subsidies without HHS making a serious attempt to verify eligibility. So I know we should do more research into this. We're looking forward to your report, but these are policy issues that are being applied today as we talk. Finally, your statement notes this investigation was conducted with limited backstopping. Can you describe what backstopping is and why limited backstopping is important?
Sure. Limited backstopping essentially involves the extent to which we employ investigative techniques. This was pretty much, I don't want to speak for my colleague, Director McElrath, who runs the investigative side of things, but basically it was a pretty simple thing to do using commonly available software, materials, and other approaches.
So in sum, you didn't have any inside information that you used about how the ACA works or doesn't work. You came at it just as any consumer would, which makes your results, again, more troubling than they might otherwise be. I think these are really important aspects to your report, and I think from a legislative perspective and oversight perspective, it makes this much more serious. The final thing I'll say is the amount of confusion this is causing people who legitimately are trying to get a subsidy is unbelievable. H&R Block says 2/3 of people are either having their tax refunds cut or getting a tax bill. IRS has told me half of the people this year are in that situation. And so this is not just about verification flaws, as you have said, the lack of controls and this lack of balance between accessibility, pushing people to get enrollment numbers up versus the verification. It's also about a lot of confusion for consumers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.